Hey guys, how's it going? So today I'm bringing you another tutorial. This time we're going to be doing more kind of heavy future bass inspired by artists like Graves or Murin. So with that in mind, we'll get right into the drop. Here's what we're going to be making today. Alright, so the first section we're going to have a look at here is the synth and the subsection. Alone, soloed out, it sounds like this. Alright, so let's start by looking at the group as a whole. I have a few things on here. First, we got two sidechain compressors, one routed to my kick and the other routed to my snare right here. We also have this reverb that adds kind of a fade out effect along with the auto filter at the very end right here. And then we also have this EQ and a glue compressor. The glue compressor is mostly just there to kind of make sure all the sounds kind of fit together, and the EQ is kind of to clean up the low section because without it, it sounds like this. Yeah, and it kind of cleans up the high end, or it kind of brings out the high end a little more as well. So the first sound we got here is the main kind of synthesizer in it. Soloed out sounds like this. Yeah, so then that just repeats. So I'll unfreeze this and kind of show you what's going on. I added this saturator called A Bit Warmer. You can find it by clicking this little arrow button and find it right here. I turned the dry wet to about 50% because it was at 100, and that's just way too much distortion for me. And I also added this EQ, taking out the sub, cleaning up a little bit of the low and low mid end, and boosting the highs and taking out a little bit of the mid-high range. The patch itself looks like this. It's just two of the initial saw waves with the unison boosted up to about 7, and then the detune knobs right there. And this second oscillator is boosted up an octave. I also took this first LFO and put it on the levels, as you can see right here, to kind of give it that pumping feeling, I guess. Then the effects section, I just have the hyper dimension expander. Turn that off, but I just turned the hyper mix up a little bit, and then put the compressor effect on it, put on the multiband section, or the multiband option, and boosted up the gain a little bit. So yeah, that's it for that sound. Let me just freeze this again. Alright, so the next sound we have here is my sub bass. Soloed out sounds like this. just repeats again. So the effects I have on this is an EQ, but I have it in the mid-side mode. Basically, I just boosted the low end, cleaned up a bit of the mid-low frequencies, and took out a lot of the high frequencies in the mid kind of section. And then in the side, I just took out the very, very low end. And then I also had this utility and took the width down to 0 to make sure my sub was mono, because you always want to make sure your sub bass is mono compatible. And all this is the sub oscillator with the sine wave option and a square wave with the octave taken down 1 with the same LFO modulating the square and the sub bass. And then just a little bit of distortion and the multiband compressor again. The next sound we have here is a frozen sample of the first synth, but I boosted the LFO rate to 1/8 instead of 1/4, so it has this kind of effect. And then in the audio clip, I took the transposition down an octave and gave it kind of this rising effect. So again, that's how I got this sound. The next section we have here is another serum, but it's just kind of clean detuned saws. I didn't add the multiband compressor or anything, so they sound like this. And there's just a little bit of reverb on there and EQing, just taking out the low end again. Then I layered a bunch of lead sounds, the first sound being this. And this is just another serum patch. This time the initial saw wave again boosted up 7 unison. I made it a lot more detuned, and then it's that same saw patch, but I boosted it up 7, took the detune down a little bit, and put the sync modulation on it, so it gave it more of a, I don't know, just a different sound as opposed to just a regular saw. So here's what it would have sounded like. Here's what it sounds like with that on. Yeah, and then, again, hyperdimension expander, distortion, and multiband compression. The next layer I have for that also is this sound. This is one of my favorite layers for my super saws. It's just a massive patch I've made. I've gone over it in a few different tutorials, but this is basically what it is 3 oscillators, one's a square, and 2 are saws, and they're just detuned right here. I add the Bronner tube and dimension expander. You can look at those right there. And then in the voicing tab, I boost the unison up to 5. Put it on mono, and then turn the pitch cutoff about that much. And in the oscillators tab, I put the detune down 12 so it'll pitch with everything how I want it to. So yeah, the last layer for that kind of lead is this sound. And this is just another massive patch. It's just the carbon synth put right there, and then I put the bend minus on and boosted the intensity about half and put on the classic tube. So yeah, you can just follow those again. And then instead of, I don't have LFO tool or anything like that, so I just use the auto pan, and I put the phase at 360, the offset at 180, put it on this triangle mode, and then put the amount to 100. And then if you switch from hertz to this little music note, you can actually change the rate to exactly what you want it to be. So yeah, and then there's this EQ. I also have this layer. It kind of sounds like a keys and crates kind of synth, so that sounds like this. Yeah, and here's the EQ for that. I did the same kind of auto pan thing with it. So here's the patch. It's 3 saw waves, each at a different octave and detuned a little bit. Then I also have some reverb on it. In the voicing tab, I have the pan position on to a full envelope, and then the unison all the way at 16, so it's just super distorted. And then I have this third envelope with the attack taken back a little bit, and then I put it on each of the oscillators, so it gives that kind of pitching up effect that keys and crates are so famous for. Alright, next we have the vocal chop, which I got from an Imagine Dragons song, and I just chopped it up and pitched them into key, and soloed they sound like this. And I put an amp on it, just adding a little bit of distortion, a ping pong delay, and reverb. Then I also have this glue compressor bringing all the levels evenly. Then an OTT multi-band compressor, and I took the kind of very low end and pushed it all the way back so there was no low end coming through. And then the EQ, I'm also just cutting it off and cleaning up some of the low mid and mid-high frequencies. So yeah. And then what I did is I actually layered it with the same acapella, but I changed some of the placings of the vocals, and I just pitched it up an octave. So it sounds like this. And that's how I kind of get those really thick ambient vocals in the background of it, is literally I just take the same vocal chops I did, move them down, pitch them up an octave in the audio clip, and then move them to different places to make it add a little more movement in the track. So yeah. The next sound I have here is just a square wave that I distorted and pitched along with some of the vocals, so it kind of just adds a little something in the background. They sound like this. It just adds another bit of layers to the vocals in those kind of empty areas where nothing but the vocals are going on, and I like the sound of that. And the next thing we have here is the layer for the sub. This is a serum patch that I made by myself. I think I took a drum sample and I put it into serum and made kind of a dirty sounding synth basically, and alone sounds like this. And I just have Camel Crusher on it, distorting it a little bit, a OTT, and then another mid-side EQ, where the side and the mid are both cutting off the low end and just doing different things here, like boosting the highs a little more and just cleaning up the sound in general. The next sound I have here is a vocal that I made a while ago that just kind of adds a nice layer to it. It's really ambient and wide, sounds like this. And I just have a multi-band compressor on there, and I'm cutting off the low end, and it just repeats throughout the drop. Then in the second half of the drop, I add this arpeggiator. Sounds like this. And it's just another serum patch. This time I went into basic shapes and went to the saw wave, and then the BS2 subby saw, and I synced the saw wave and made the first envelope kind of a pitch or a pluck kind of shape, and then I added a bunch of effects to it like a ping pong delay and a reverb, and then I EQ'd it, really taking out a lot of the sound just so you don't hear it as much, but there's still a presence of it. And the last sound I have is a choir in Contact, and that sounds like this. Again, taking out the low end and boosting the highs a little bit. Yeah, the vowel is A, in case you were wondering. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the synths and the subsection. Alright, so the next section we're going to have a look at is the kick and the snare, and alone soloed out sounds like this. Alright, so on the group I have an OTT, a EQ, cutting off the very, very, very low end and taking out some of the high and low mid frequencies. Well, I guess it's some mid frequencies. And then also a loop compressor. Then samples themselves, I have this kick, which is my main kick. Sounds like this. So on this, basically, I added the drum full parallel option in the glue compressor section. So if you're wondering what that is, you can find it right here. Basically, it just evens out the whole kick, having a super long or delayed attack, and then a really quick release, and the ratio right there, and then dry wet at about 50%. Then I also added this saturator preset, the mid-range fattener right here. Turn that down to about 50 as well. I threw on a multi-band compressor and then also an EQ, cleaning up the very low mids and then taking out even some of the highs just so it doesn't conflict as much with the big super saw in the high end. So again, sounds like this. Yep. And then I layered that with a lot more kind of reverby, punchy kick, sounding like this. And basically all I did was take out all the low end, take down a lot of the mid frequencies, and even take out some of the high end. Right, and then for the snare, I have 4 different samples making up my snare. The first one I recorded in the kitchen with a microphone, and it's just my roommate hitting a pan, and it sounds like this. And I just have an EQ taking out the low and some of the mid frequencies, taking down some of the high mid frequencies and boosting the highs. The second layer is this sound. Just kind of like a typical trap snare, again taking out a lot of the low and mid frequencies. The third layer is this sound, which is kind of the main snare sound. And that's just basically a clap with a bunch of reverb on it, taking out some of the low end and dipping in the mid-high frequencies. Then the last sample is a dubstep snare, but I added an OTT filter to it, so it gives it kind of that big reverb to kind of fill up any empty space that is still in the track, and sounds like this. And since it's basically like a white noise, I added a sidechain compressor to the kick, so it's not really conflicting with very much of the drums. And then added this EQ, taking out the low, dipping in the low mids, and taking out even some of the highs. So yeah, that's it for my kick and my snare. Alright, so the last section we have here is my background drums and effects soloed out. They sound like this. Alright, so on the group as a whole, we got two sidechain compressors, one to my kick, one to my snare, and then this EQ, this crazy EQ, taking a lot of the kind of conflicting frequencies out from it, and then a glue compressor. If you're wondering what it all sounds like without that EQ, it sounds like this. So yeah, it just kind of cleans it up basically. And the first thing we have here is one of the crash cymbals. Soloed out's this. And basically I'm just taking out the very low end of the crash cymbal. The second layer for the crash is this. Again, taking out some of the low and even taking out some of the very high end. When I'm making kind of my background drums, I kind of think about how the sound would rhythmically fit with what I'm trying to do. So I try and not just throw random drums everywhere. I try and kind of make a beat of itself out of each one of my drums, seeing where it'll fit. That's just a little side note. But anyways, the next sound I have is these hi-hats that I just took a bunch of random samples of hi-hats, tuned them, and then consolidated them into one loop and added an OTT and took out the very low end. And they sound like this. And again, I try to think about it rhythmically, kind of keeping the groove going and keeping kind of playing off of the groove that I have with my kick and snare. And then at the very beginning I have this clap sample. Just kind of adding a little bit of filler to the beginning. And I'm taking out the low and the very mid-high end. Then I have this really weird table hit sound. And that's from me, I believe, hitting something against the table, and then I threw a bunch of different effects on it and detuned it, and then I again added just an EQ. But yeah, whenever I'm experimenting with background drums, I try and use as many real life sounds as I can that I can just record in my kitchen or samples I already have. It adds just kind of some originality to it. And then I made this snare roll where I EQ'd it before, and then this is basically it. Oop. And all that is the same snare, but I just changed the volume of these two, and then I transposed the pitch starting at 5 semitones and going down to 0 because I already pitched the drums, and again just copy and pasted that to the second one. It adds a nice kind of filler in the second half of the drop when I introduce more drums. And then I have this reverse crash cymbal just kind of helping build to the second half of the drum and back into the verse. And it sounds like this. And then I EQ'd that as well, taking out the low and some of the mid-low frequencies. Then I have this other snare. Also a very dubsteppy snare, but again, just crazy EQ, taking out the low and some of the mid frequencies. And this is just kind of every offbeat after the original snare, and even layering sometimes with the snare. Then I have this random percussion hit that I found in the Ableton stock library, and it sounds like this. It's just some kind of really messy hi-hat that I pitched. Yeah, down 5 semitones on the second one. And then I EQ'd it, taking out some of the low and low mid frequencies. Then I have my hi-hat that comes in the second half of the drop. Yeah, and I took everything out besides the high end for that. And then I have this reversed piano sound that I took from the track. Again, leading back into the verse. So yeah, that's it for this tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed. Like, comment, subscribe, do whatever you want. And if you found this helpful, comment below what other kind of music you want me to do. Alright, have a good one.